we're going to do some common questions as a result of the recent settlement. And we're going to answer these questions with our general counsel from Berkshire Hathaway. I think it's going to be I'm very excited to hear Darren's answers to these questions.
This is Las Vegas Real Estate Now with local real estate expert Harvey Blankfeld.
I want to talk about these recent changes. I'm going to call them, I don't know if it's a proper term, I'm going to call them administrative changes to the way we do business in real estate that were enacted here. They were acted here in Southern Nevada on August 1st, and then throughout the country, throughout all the other MLSs throughout the nation on the 17th of August, I think is when they started.
Correct.
Right? So Darren, we've got some true and false questions. These are questions that we keep getting from consumers about these changes, and I hear them over and over again. So I thought I would review them with you, and we could talk about the true or false answers of these questions. So let's just get into these things right away. And let me pull them up so everybody can see what they are. Okay, so the first question is, as a buyer, I must sign a contract in order for a realtor to be able to show me a home. Is that true?
Correct.
It's true.
Right.
Okay, and it didn't used to be that way.
No.
But I have to say,
So from the settlement, what they want you to do, they're trying to empower. I don't know if you've ever heard that word. It's one of your three.
it's one of my three big words.
E's.
Yes, that's one of my E's.
Right.
Yes.
So they're trying to. The NAR is a private trade organization, right? A lot of power, a lot of money. Been around a long time. MLS started in the late 1800s.
Right.
Fun fact.
Yep.
But they're a vendor. They're just a middleman. And so from the changes that have happened with the lawsuit, whatever.
Yeah.
Concept is we empower the buyer, and the buyer now signs a buyer's brokerage agreement with their agent / broker as to what services they're going to be being provided by the buyer's broker. And one of the things is all buyers throughout the United States of America, and I'm talking Puerto Rico to Hawaii.
Wow.
I mean, think about it. It's big. We're a big place, right?
Yep.
So all buyers must sign a representation agreement.
Right.
It's called the different things in different places, but agency sometimes. We call it a buyer's brokerage agreement,
Right.
BBA. And you have to have that before you begin to show homes. Why? Because technically you're working for that buyer while you're showing them a home. Before the rule in Nevada, prior to August 1, so July 31st,
Right.
you didn't have to have anything in writing by Nevada law until you reduced something to writing, meaning you wrote a contract, and that was you had to have a duties owed from NRS 645, Nevada Revised Statute NRS 645. And so now we have the buyer's brokerage agreement, and that is to be signed prior to showing a home.
Yes.
So physically,
Yep.
Before you walk in the door.
before you walk in the door, and FaceTime.
Yeah.
Oh, you
And
can't
it
do, you can't
specifically
do a
talks about-
FaceTime. Okay.
Even video tours.
Video tours.
Right.
Wow.
Video tours are
Interesting.
mentioned in the rules in the
Okay.
in the rules from NAR.
Okay.
So if you've got a buyer who's, at work,
And what's
let's
this?
say they're a prison guard,
Yeah.
can't get out of their shift today.
Right.
Let's say
Okay.
there's an uprising in that prison. They're not going home for a while. Maybe they're held hostage.
All right.
Okay.
All right.
But they want to see that condo,
But they're on.
and so they get a little.
All right.
Somehow they get internet access because
Okay.
they cut that at the prisons. But anyway,
They cut the phone lines. They forgot to cut the.
you got to send them a buyer's brokerage agreement in advance. Have them
Okay.
docu-sign it
Okay.
before you can show them the home.
Gotcha.
There you go.
Interesting.
So how is that being enforced?
That's a great question. There is no enforcement whatsoever.
So
So it is enforced by in-house. It is enforced the same way now. Okay, by law, if you sign a contract with your client, when are you supposed to turn it into your broker pursuant to the Nevada Real Estate Division? 5 days. Supposed to get it to them in 5 days.
Yeah.
So how do we know that happened? The
date it was signed?
broker
Yeah.
tells you, but you should do it, and then you monitor your own files, and then every now and then the real estate division will come in and audit you.
Yeah.
So it's going to be very similar.
but let's just say you have a buyer, you didn't do that, you write the offer. What happens to the agent?
It would be
Yeah.
an internal problem, and then ultimately, it really comes down to compensation because there is no longer
Oh, right.
commission offered
There's
on
no-
the
yeah, if you don't
multiple
have an
listing
agreement,
service.
you're not going to get. You may not get paid.
You're not
That's
going to
right.
get paid.
Yeah.
Right.
Because there's no one committed to paying you.
Right. So
And
the new
buyer
thing
can't-
is, you would show homes to a buyer all Saturday afternoon, and you would eventually, yay, we love this house.
Yeah.
Let's sign a duties owed, and then we write an offer. And now before that, the first thing will be the duties owed. which is an agency agreement pursuant to the Nevada Real Estate Division that
Right.
says, hey, I'm your agent. This is what I have to do.
Yeah.
And then we will sign the buyer's brokerage agreement before. And then the interesting thing is so that buyer's brokerage agreement will exist. It could be weeks before you write an offer. Heck,
Yeah.
it could be a year,
Up to a year.
Right. Because you might have a client who is moving here
Yeah.
and they fly in every other weekend and they're just looking. And you don't write an offer until like this November.
Yeah.
Right.
But they've been looking with you for months.
Right. So the timeline on these contracts is varied, but there is a rule it can't go over a year. I
Correct.
heard that. But
Oh, it can't.
remember when we went to real estate school before we were licensed, we went to real estate school, and they told us, and this is remember years ago,
Yeah.
that we were going to eventually have to be signing buyer brokerage
Right.
agreements. They've been telling us that for decades. And we and I'll confess, I haven't been doing it up
The
until this
Nevada
point.
law, NRS 645,
Yeah.
which controls, what an agent is supposed to do.
Yeah.
Talks about duties that an agent has to the consumer.
Right.
Many years ago, I'm talking 2 decades.
Right.
They changed the language. You know how they go through statutes and they'll say, it used to say the word him or her, and now it's they, whatever.
Right.
They went in and changed it from what does real estate mean, and they moved it from exclusive listing, exclusive seller representation, and they just said exclusive representation.
Ah.
So I'm talking 97.
Yeah.
And so it's always been there.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that we thought it would go to what it is now
Right.
a long time ago.
We really did.
So the statute is not affected. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah, that is interesting.
So
That is
because
interesting.
you have to have a buyer's brokerage agreement and it's exclusive,
Right.
I mean, you work with that buyer works with you and you work with them, just like a listing. The statute is unaffected. It's always been ready for this
Interesting.
change.
Interesting.
Yep.
But the thing that created the situation was a lawsuit.
Yeah.
That's what
settlement- the
forced. That's
settlement,
what forced the issue.
That's what forced the settlement.
Yep.
Yeah.
The settlement is what's created new rules, and
Yeah.
the lawsuits would cause the settlement. Absolutely. Okay, so let's try number 2 here. So as a seller, true or false? As a seller, my listing contract only commits me to pay a commission to my realtor.
Correct.
Okay. See, you both
Oh,
got
yeah.
that right. Yes. Anyway, mark them down,
We
Carly.
need to
They both
have- we
got.
need to have
they
those
both got-
paddles,
they
that
both-
paddles
Yeah,
and-
they both got it right.
Well, so technically, a listing in Nevada prior to August 1 also only committed the
Right.
seller to
Right.
pay the listing agent.
Correct.
Right.
Because the listing agent would take a commission and take some of that commission and share it with the buyer's brokerage.
Right.
And so the change really is kind of fascinating because there is no change.
Yeah,
Right,
because
The
now
seller
the
Exactly.
still only pays the seller's broker.
right, and now that broker cannot commit
Correct.
in multiple lists to paying or cooperating
Yeah.
with a buyer's agent.
You just can't do it on the MLS.
Right. They can market it elsewhere. Yeah.
A seller's agent could still take a listing, for example, of raw land,
Right.
right? They take the listing at 7%. And the raw land is way out in the middle of Nevada. And the seller's agent could put on their sign, there's a commission of X percent to any buyer's agent.
Yeah.
And it would come out of the seller's commission. I'm sorry, the listing broker's commission.
Gotcha.
So what we did though to make it easier is we eliminated that.
Cooperative part.
Right. So
Yeah.
now the listing brokerage, the listing agreement only discusses commission to the seller's agent.
Gotcha. Number 3. Here's true or false. Commissions cannot be negotiated in a contract to purchase.
False.
Good guess. You had a 50-50 chance there, and you got it right.
Yeah, they can be.
But they weren't, it used to be the exact opposite.
No.
I mean, it used
So it's technical, right?
Right.
So what? Again, this is the same as when we talked about the listing, the seller paying a buyer's agent. So
Right.
technically, the seller only paid their agent, and then the
Yeah.
listing agent shared. Okay, so commissions cannot be negotiated in a contract to purchase. That's not in the old days. It was okay.
Yeah.
The problem is a broker is not supposed to ask for additional commission
Right.
themselves.
Okay.
A buyer can request anything they want
Okay.
in the purchase agreement.
Gotcha.
And to this, now they can again.
Yeah.
And that, of course, we can talk later, but that
Yeah,
divides
this is
up.
not
And
this is not the buyer's agent asking the seller. This is the buyer asking
Buyer.
the seller to give me some money back so that I
Right.
can pay my agent. So I have enough money to cover my agent's costs.
every single agreement, really, since time began in real estate,
Yeah.
there is a negotiation of commission, because commission is really nothing more than, you could call it a concession,
Right.
Yeah.
or you could call it a closing cost. So anytime you buy something, you know, even if you were buying a stove,
Right.
who's going to pay the sales tax? And so there could be a negotiation. So in real estate,
Yeah.
a concession is somebody paying something for somebody else. And anytime you write an offer, so now it's like, okay, I'm going to ask for closing costs and whatever. Let's go back 2 years. A buyer would say, I'll buy your house and we're going to split the closing costs. What's the closing cost? Well, we have to have title insurance, and we're going to have to go down and record the deed at county. That's
Yeah.
going to cost $8. Who's going to pay for that?
Right.
So as soon as you say who's paying for the recording of the deed down at county, you are negotiating closing costs.
Right.
And we're used to it.
Yeah.
Because we say general stuff, like a buyer could say, like, well, that makes sense. I mean, I'm okay with splitting the costs of title insurance,
Yeah.
or
Escrow fees.
recording the
Right.
deed.
Yep.
And so we've always negotiated closing costs inside a transaction.
Yeah, it used to be, saying a buyer would come to us and they would say, gee, I'd like to buy this house and I have enough money for my down payment, but I don't have enough money to cover all these
Right.
closing costs. Can we buy something and figure out a way? And we would say, sure, let's write a contract where we ask the seller to help you with closing costs. You come up with your down payment and let's see if we can't find that for you.
Right.
It's the same thing now with this commission element. This, you
Yep.
know, it's the
It's
same
just like
thing.
if a buyer has an inspection and they come back and they say, we found a leak in the garage
Yeah.
roof.
Right.
And you say, Mr. Seller, will you pay for this repair?
Right.
And the seller can say, yes, I'll fix it myself, or I'll give you $500 to fix it,
Or
or
no.
I'll lower the price
Or no.
by $500. Or they'll say no.
Yeah, no.
So it's just a negotiation of an outside cost. All real estate has peripheral costs.
Yeah.
Always.
Yeah. There are closing costs
Yeah.
on both sides of the equation, and they're
And
all negotiable.
And like, for example, many modern homes have homeowners associations.
Right.
And sometimes you have a setup fee
right.
where they'll be like, look, to join this association, it's $175. We got to get you in the system. And,
Yeah.
and you negotiate that type of stuff.
Yep.
And that's what a
Who's paying it?
commission,
Exactly.
compensation back to the buyer will now be negotiated.
And that was the fourth question: was closing costs on transaction or non-negotiable? We just discussed that. They are
Right.
absolutely negotiable,
Right.
and all except for one, which is the resale package, which the state of Nevada deemed necessary the seller pay for and provide.
Correct.
That.
Right.
That's the only thing that's not negotiable in the contract. Everything else is wide open. Now,
What if the buyer wants to pay that though?
They can.
Yeah.
yeah,
So the closing cost on a common interest community, or HOA, is specifically states the seller has to provide it.
Right.
But the remedy for the seller not providing it is the buyer has the right to cancel escrow, and that's it.
right,
You can't force the sale.
right.
So if the seller doesn't provide the CIC package and the buyer elects to close, if you keep reading the statute, it says the buyer has accepted all information in the non-existent package.
yeah,
So you are stuck with everything in there if you don't get it.
right,
But your power is to walk away. Well, this happens a lot in state statutes, and it's one of my pet peeves. Is that's not a remedy,
yeah,
because
Right.
if my U-Haul's in the driveway
yeah,
and my family's moving from Alaska to here because I got transferred in the Air Force,
right.
the last thing I want to hear is congratulations, you get to cancel escrow
Yeah.
and start all over. So it's
Right.
kind of a weird rule, but
that's- okay.
mostly you tell the sellers just pay for it,
Just pay
please.
for it, please,
Right.
yeah. Let's not worry. And there are typical. I mean, look, I use this term carefully. There are typical ways we do transactions, but everything in the transaction is always negotiable.
Right.
Yeah.
But there are typical ways we look at. There's certain ways we write most. Certain things fall to the buyer side of the ledger. Certain things fall to the seller side of the ledger, and those just depending upon market conditions.
It's
too.
culture. It's
Yeah.
culture and market. I can remember before the recession, new home builder, would make you pay for everything.
Yeah.
Everything.
Right.
You paid for title insurance, closing costs,
Transfer tax, all that.
transfer tax.
Yep.
They're like, take it or leave it.
Yeah.
And then things change, and they're like, oh, please, Mr. Buyer, we really want you to buy this home.
Yeah.
We will throw in the fact that we'll pay your closing costs.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's just the market.
It is. It is. By all means. And so, okay, so let's get into these next two are a little trickier questions, but I think they're important to understand the nature of what's happened with these things. So number 5, true or false, lenders will now allow sellers to credit buyers enough funds to pay their realtor. So a buyer can ask the seller to give me a credit to offset this cost,
Right.
and lenders will allow that within they're okay with that.
Yes.
Okay.
Not only is it yes, so it's another trick question because
It's always been that
it's
way.
always been that way.
Yeah.
See, this makes me crazy because it's always been that way and they've made it so complicated.
Yeah.
It makes our heads want to explode.
Right. So in the rules of lending,
Yeah.
it is for those listeners who've ever purchased a home.
Yes.
Before, you might have a situation where the seller says, hey, I'll credit you $825 towards even repairs.
Right.
And sometimes the lender comes back and says, hold on.
What repairs? Yeah.
The ratio is too high.
Yeah.
You can't give you can only give a buyer so much money
Right.
when you're borrowing with a federally backed loan.
Right.
So if you've ever bought a home before, you'll have these weird scenarios where the lender will announce you are going to get a credit of $1,250. You can only get a credit of $1,180.
Right.
Because it has to meet a ratio to meet the federal rules. And so every now and then there's this $70 weirdness and the buyer has no idea what's going on. That's because you cannot
Yeah.
pay the buyer to close escrow because the lenders don't want you to not have the ability to wherewithal, whatever. But
Right. Well, first of all, it can't exceed the actual closing costs. You can't give a
Right.
buyer money to help them with their down payment. We know that.
Right.
That's like loan
but
fraud.
Right.
it's
But it's
typed
capped even
out
beyond
and
that.
It's chipped in stone what the rules are. It's a total
Yeah.
ratio. You can only have so much money towards your price versus down payment, et cetera.
But the last true or false question is that credit would limit the buyer's ability to get more assistance with closing costs from a seller. What this means is that the commission element of this is separated from that cap.
Correct.
So
it's always been like that.
it's always been like that. So but now it comes to light because now we need it. Now we
Right.
need it more than ever because before we didn't have to worry about it because there was a cooperation from the listing broker.
So
now we don't have
for
that
many
anymore.
years, when you're borrowing money on a federally backed loan, what is that noise?
Yeah.
Is that an airplane?
It's a truck.
It was a
Wow.
truck. Wow.
So when you're borrowing money with a federally backed loan, a normal loan,
Uh-huh.
the rule has always been that compensation paid to the buyer's agent is not included in the calculation of the ratio of how much help a buyer can get from a seller.